بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين، وسبحان الله العلي العظيم. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين، وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. سبحان الله، نحمده ونستعينه ونستنصره ونستجيره ونستهديه، فإنه حق من هدى الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. اللهم يا رحمن يا رحيم، ربنا اللهم لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد أن هديتنا، وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة. ربنا وافتح بيننا وبين قومنا بالحق، وأنت خير الفاتحين. ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك، ولا تخزنا يوم القيامة. ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك أنبنا وإليك المصير، فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عن سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. سبحانك رب العزة عما يصفون، وسلام على المرسلين. In so many khutbahs, I emphasize what, in my view, is a critical theme. We all know, or we should know, that Allah has left us, or has created us, as khulafa, as trustees on this earth. Istakhlafana fil ard has literally made us khulafa in the plural of a caliph. So Allah has made us caliphs in the plural on this earth. And the taklif, the obligation that Allah has gave us, an obligation like an affirmative command, is like being given a duty, a function, a purpose, is that we na'budullah, is that we worship Allah. And Allah taught us that the obligation of Khilafah, the caliphate, and the obligation of ibadah, the worship, can only be attained not just through salah and sawm, not just through prayer and fasting and supplications, but Allah has made clear, abundantly clear, and those who are not clear should study the halaqat of tafsir in Project Lumen, that the obligation or the trust of Khilafah and the obligation of ibadah can only be achieved through service, khidmah, and sacrifice. As Allah has put it, يؤثرون على أنفسهم ولو بهم خصاصة, that sacrifice will involve that you put others ahead of yourself and serve others, even if the cost is to prefer others over yourself. This is basic theology. This is Theology 101. This is the ABCs of Islam, regardless of how often people become confused, how often people try to ignore this message, how often people are not attuned to it, or how often people try to philosophize it away or to rationalize it away. This is the ABCs of Islam, and it sums up the life of the Prophet ﷺ pretty much. Anyone that studies the life of the Prophet is struck by this man's constant act of service, and that he taught his companions, his disciples, his followers the same. The stories of service and dedication are so numerous that to us, to people in this age, they often read like fairy tales, because our consciousness often cannot wrap its mind around this type of attitude towards life on this earth. But there is a bit of cognitive dissonance, a very painful and brutal, and in fact, paralyzing cognitive dissonance, when you situate yourself and sit a moment in so many of the realities that surround us about Islam and Muslims. An inescapable reality, a reality that if you are living in the world we exist in, and before I go on about this reality, I want to take a moment to just say something about living in the world we exist in. The temptation is indeed great. The temptation is indeed great for a human being, leave alone a Muslim, to not ground himself in the world that we exist in, and to create an artificial, fictional world that saves them or that serves as a constant distraction from having to be grounded in the world that we do exist in. But how can you perform the obligation that is critical to both deputyship of Khilafah, to both being a Khalifa on this earth, and to Ibadah? What is this obligation that is critical both to Ibadah and Khilafah? It is the obligation of witnessing. How can you be shuhada lillah, witnesses for Allah, if you are not grounded in the reality that we exist in? If you witness a fiction that you've created through your own delusions and whims and weakness, because your sensitivities and sensibilities are vulnerable, so you've created an alternative, and that alternative is what you actually witness, you have not discharged the obligation of shahada lillah. These again are just elementaries. In order to witness, you must be grounded in reality. You must have consciousness and awareness. So, if you are indeed grounded, the inescapable reality that we have all witnessed very recently are the developments in Syria. But like everything, as I've said in many khutbahs before, everything for those who are truly conscientious witnesses, everything is a constant, never-ending education from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And such is Syria. If you are at all alert, if you are at all aware, the most striking thing about Syria is the flood of testimonials that have been coming out about over 50 years of indescribable, unimaginable human suffering. Hundreds, indeed thousands upon thousands of people are coming out of prisons, and what they describe is your worst absolute nightmare. Indeed, even your worst nightmare cannot conceive of what these people are describing. Numerous stories that can be summed up in an ongoing process of dehumanization of the human being. Stories of people that are disappeared from the very first day, an endless stream of abuses and torture and degradation and humiliation that often ends up for so many in death, whether executed or dead because of mistreatment or dead because of torture. But death is a welcome reprieve. It is a way out for so many. What they are left to live with for the rest of their lives is indeed worse, much worse than death. The stories and the testimonials and the witnessing is so horrific that I cannot address it in this khutbah or any other khutbah. The utter dehumanization, the utter degradation, the abuse that reaches levels that are unimaginable to the human mind, that includes everything that your worst imagination can possibly conjure up. Beatings, breaking bones, electricity, hangings, rape, everything you can imagine. You pause for a second and you tell yourself a truth. It is an undeniable truth that the people who have gone through this human-made demonic hell are not forever changed, but they are forever injured. Nothing, but nothing, will heal those who have survived the hell of the political prisons of Syria. We like to believe that we have means of healing, but the truth of the matter is there is no healing. The human mind, once it sees a level of ugliness that is beyond the demonic, the nervous system is forever rewired in ways that cannot be undone. What is seen cannot be unseen. What is experienced cannot be unexperienced. But you pause and another truth settles in with you. It is not just the people who have gone through this hell who are forever changed and forever affected and who are forever injured, but the people in the orbit of the people who have been tortured. Everyone who ever loved them, everyone who ever cared for them, everyone who have forever ever dealt with them is forever changed and forever injured, because the injured injure others. The injured affect others, whether they like it or not, whether they want it or not. But then a third truth settles in with you. It is not just the people in the orbit of those who have been tortured, who are in turn tortured, but indeed, it is society at large that hears directly or indirectly, whether through the grapevines or through some other direct means, but society that comes to terms with the fact that just because a person is born human is no guarantee that such a person will remain human, comes to terms with the fact that you must watch what you say, you must watch what you do, you must watch what you think, lest your fate be like the fate of those who disappeared, those who were raped, those who were abused, those who were humiliated and degraded. In fact, what is remarkable is something that we know about reigns of terror throughout history. No matter how many they kill, they leave a percentage that is alive so that they will go out in society and spread the stories of terror and horror so that the entire society will learn the lesson of fear and panic and anxiety. And the more anxious the society, the more delusional the society becomes. The more fearful the society, the less grounded in reality they want to be. Fear is a very natural indicator in delusions and hallucinations and disassociation. Fear and trauma are natural teachers that being grounded in reality, indeed witnessing, indeed taking seriously your job as a khalifa, and taking seriously your job as a person of service and sacrifice is dangerous. But then you pause and you say, in fact, before I go there, there's another element that's very striking about everything coming out from Syria. And that is how thoroughly corrupt the society is. How those who have money bribe judges and bribe torturers so they can survive. And those who don't have money are the ones that die under torture or are executed. The stories are numerous of survivors, of their families paying bribes in the hundreds of thousands to judges, to the very torturers of their sons and daughters. Everyone has their hands in the pockets of everyone else. But then you pause and you remember something that is impossible to forget. Syria is full of shuyukh and is full of shuyukh who put their hands in the hand of Bashar al-Assad, the ruler, the terrorizer of Syria, who on camera did dua, not just dua, praised him as a genius, as a man of God, as a great leader, who did dua for him and for his family. And you know very well that the shuyukh who are not willing to do that are already either disappeared in prison or murdered. But the official representation of religion, i.e. the remaining shuyukh, are the ones who shower praise on the butcher of Syria. Of course, delusion tempts you to stop there and to say, well, these poor shuyukh, maybe they didn't have a choice. But being grounded in reality brings up another factor. There are many shuyukh and men of women of God, not in Syria, not under the threat of Bashar al-Assad, who for decades lived at peace. And in fact, in ways or another, they might pretend today to be happy about the overthrow of the dictator. But right before the dictator was thrown, they were untroubled, unoffended. The truth is that we cannot claim or feign ignorance. If you're grounded in reality, you would know about the Syrian journalist or photographer who escaped from Syria in 2013 and who published the images of more than 50,000 people murdered and butchered, who testified before Congress, who had exhibits shown all around the world. Back in 2013, everyone knew the truth about the butcher of Syria. But how could that be? How could that be when you know that the Prophet ﷺ once saw a donkey branded on its face? And when he saw a donkey branded on its face, the Prophet ﷺ became very upset. And he said, "May Allah curse who has done this." And you know that in Islamic jurisprudence, Most jurists has outlawed the branding, with something that's done in the West all the time, in the United States all the time, have outlawed the branding of animals with hot iron. You can't burn a mark on the animal because that's torturing the animal. And the Prophet ﷺ said that if you torture an animal, Allah curses you. And you also know the well-known narrative when a companion saw some people who were being detained in the hot sun and then asked, what is going on? Why are these people being detained in the hot sun? And he was replied, there are two versions of the story. One version is that they're not Muslim and that they were being detained because they failed to pay the jizya, the poll tax. The second version of the story is that they're Muslim and they were being detained because they failed to pay their taxes, the kharaj. And upon seeing this, the companion said, this is not right, because I heard the Prophet say, alayhi salatu wasalam, he who tortures people will be tortured by Allah. And you know that in our tradition, this is deeply settled, deeply ingrained. And in this context, they will often cite a report from Ibn Mas'ud in which the famous companion and early jurist, when Ibn Mas'ud taught that those before you were destroyed because they neglected al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy an al-munkar, because they no longer pursued what is good and prohibited what is bad. And when he is questioned, Ibn Mas'ud, and in his words exactly, هلك من لم يعرف قلبه معروفا ولم ينكر قلبه منكرا. That Ibn Mas'ud first explains, or upon further elaboration explains, that before you are able to do the task of pursuing what is good and resisting what is evil, first your heart must know what is right, and your heart must know what is bad, what is immoral, what's unethical. And if you are unable to do so, what is Ibn Mas'ud saying? Ibn Mas'ud saying you're not grounded in reality. Grounded in reality is to recognize what is good, what is ethical, what is moral, and to recognize what is unethical and immoral. And according to Ibn Mas'ud, halaka, ruined, are the people who are no longer sufficiently grounded to know the difference. Put these elements together. Grounded in reality, the obligation of khilafah, the obligation of ibadah, the prohibition, not just prohibition, but the Prophet ﷺ teaching that cursed, mal'oon are those who torture an animal, even if it's branding. Leave alone torture a human being. That even failure to pay the jizya or failure to pay the taxes, just being forced to stand in the hot sun something that is done all over the Muslim world for practically even no punishment. You go, you want a government service, you might have to stand in the sun for hours before they do anything to help you. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم أسأل الله يستجيب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى. آمين آمين. But you do know that if you're grounded in reality, that the way that the butcher of Syria tortured his victims was not by referencing Islam at all. In fact, the methods of torture centered on humiliating and degrading all Islamic symbolisms and all Islamic affiliations among his victims. In other words, cumulative stories of torture break down the religiosity of people inside their heart, to the extent that the victims are forced to prostrate to the picture of Bashar al-Assad and to denounce Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet. But here's the thing. And this is where your entire being takes a pause. You know, unless you're delusional, unless you live in a fictitious world, that what happened or what in Syria is not an exception. That when it comes to the Muslim world, it is rather the rule. That the only reason we are listening and witnessing Syria because Assad fled and people are coming out of the prisons and testifying. We know that the same brutality, the same dehumanization, the same grotesqueness is taking place in Saudi, in the Emirat, in Iran, in Morocco, in Sudan, in Libya, in Egypt. I am sure that if people come out of Egyptian prisons tomorrow, you will hear testimonials no less traumatizing and shocking. So here is where a serious conscientious pause is required. We have an administration that is coming to power. In an article, a very good article that I read, that every Muslim should read, by Spencer Ackerman, called 225 will be the year of Trump's crackdown on Islam. Look up the article. Spencer Ackerman Spencer Ackerman wrote a very good book about the aftermath of 9/11 upon the United States and how Islamophobia played a direct role in the deterioration of democracy in the United States. If you want to be a Muslim grounded in reality, read the book. And if you want to be a Muslim grounded in reality, read the article. Why do I bring up the article by Ackerman? Here it is. Ackerman says that so many of the people that Trump is appointing are the people who believe in a clash of civilizations, that believe that Israel is part of the light and luminosity of the West vis-a-vis the darkness of Islam. Ackerman says that those people who believe in clash of civilizations see Muslims as the other, the forces of darkness. But I ask you as Muslims, when you turn to every Muslim country and you know that those grounded in reality are aware that what we are hearing in Syria is happening everywhere in the Muslim world, and are aware that this is the way Muslims treat other Muslims, and aware that the average Muslim and the average Muslim religious figure, the average Muslim imam, the average Muslim sheikh, there are the exceptions who defy and pay the price. But the average coexist with the realities of brutalization and dehumanization. They see what Israel is doing to the Palestinians in Gaza, 50,000 killed, but they tell themselves many more than that were killed by the Syrian regime. Thousands of Egyptians were murdered by Sisi's regime, and the average Egyptian is not troubled. The average imam is not troubled. Muslims, in fact, one of the amazing, troubling narratives that I've read is that from around the world, dictators would send their political prisoners to Muslim countries, to Tunisia, to Egypt, to Syria, to be tortured there, to obtain all the information from them. And they pay the Syrian regime, the Egyptian regime, the Jordanian regime, the Tunisian regime, they pay them so they will torture whoever they want to be tortured for them. And that before the fall of Assad, the Syrian regime took all the international prisoners who were being tortured for money and executed them to cover up, because they knew that. But I can tell you, international prisoners exist in Egypt, in Morocco, in Jordan, in Tunisia. What is my issue? My issue is witnessing and being grounded in reality to witness for God in fairness and truth. And as Ibn Mas'ud said, first, you must know what is ma'ruf, what is ethical, and what is munkar, what is unethical. First, the ABCs for khilafah and ibadah is first to be aware. As I read so many voices on Syria, I am full of hurt and resentment because many of these voices who say, oh, how awful, what, all these people coming out of Syria testifying to what they're testifying to. I know that these same voices are silent about what's going on in Egypt, are silent about what's going on in Saudi Arabia. I have one word to describe that: hypocrisy. And read what Allah tells us in Surah Al-Hadid about the hypocrites and how there is no light in their hypocrisy and in their hypocritical heart. Do you really want to pretend that Syria is an exception? You're delusional. You live in a delusional world. But the truth, to be grounded in reality, forces us to come to terms with the reconstruction of our theology. Why is it that Muslims, and I will end with this, why is it that Muslims care so much more about whether the hair of a woman is showing or not showing than they do about whether people are tortured or not tortured? The Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ said that those who tortured are mal'unun, they're cursed. No salvation, no forgiveness. And yet, how many Muslims, how many in our world today, when they ask them, what is the Sunnah of the Prophet? And they will say, part of that Sunnah is no to torture in any form, in any shape. That the Prophet cursed the torturer and never tortured anyone and never allowed for the torture of anyone. And he built an entire nation, an entire civilization. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم اسألوا الله يستجب لكم إني داع فأمنوا اللهم اعف عنا اللهم اغفر لنا اللهم ارحمنا اللهم اهدنا يا رب العالمين اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا يا كريم. Allah forgive our sins. Allah aid us, help us, assist us to be grounded in reality so that we may serve you by serving others, that we may sacrifice in your way and in your cause, so that we may become true khulafa on this earth, and that we may recognize what is immoral and unethical and ugly, and have the strength to stand up and testify against it wherever we may be and whatever may the circumstances be. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم أقول الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى والفحشاء والمنكر والبغي وإقام الصلاة